I meet a lot of people who are interested in developing a board portfolio, and of course, I hear all these interesting theories and myths from the market about how you go about building out a board portfolio and what are the rules and what works and what doesn't work. And I hear all sorts of interesting things. One of the things I've heard fairly consistently is that it takes a long time to build a board portfolio. That is an absolute myth from the market because if you are serious, we will start to see really good traction between 12 to 24 months, which is a modest period of time, in my opinion, to build out a figure board portfolio. So it does require, obviously focus and effort, but it certainly does not take multiple years. And in fact, if you're taking many, many years, either you're not that focused on it or you're not building the momentum in the right way to build a sustainable board portfolio. The second myth I get is that you have to go and do a company director course to start to serve on boards. There's no truth to that at all. It is a nice qualification, it's well recognised, but certainly don't have to rush off and do that immediately. That could be something that happens down the track, or it could even be something that's sponsored by one of the not for profit boards in lieu of board fees. There's a number of ways to get that credential, and there are alternative credentials. So obviously, I've done my credentials through Bond University. I've done a Masters of Law in Enterprise Governance, but there are other credentials. Bond do a really fabulous advanced credential, which is about half the price of a Bond of an AICD company director course. So there's a lot of alternatives. I'm not too hung up on where your qualification comes from, but I do think at some point you should formalise your governance training because the landscape is shifting and the regulatory legislative frameworks that we're operating under are constantly evolving. So some form of training is important, but in the early days when you're starting to get your first couple of board seats, it's an absolute myth that you need to have that qualification. One of the other myths that we get, and it's partly fueled a little bit by the search firms, is that you have to be a certain gender or a certain age demographic to get the board seats. That's a nonsense. And I don't care whether, people are coming, it's on the fashion that we need to have more women in the boardroom or we want, this type of diversity, token gesture appointments. I mean, you get a little bit of that in the market, but overall, when you're given that kind of feedback, I really take it with a grain of salt because we just don't see that in the private sector. I work mainly with private equity, venture capital, family offices. This is where the bulk of the board market sits. This is where the bulk of the roles happen. And of course, the reality is no one could care less of your gender, your political persuasions, your schooling backgrounds. That just doesn't, factor into decision making. It's all merit based at the end of the day. So we just don't see those issues. So don't buy into those myths in the market. One of the other big myths is that you just apply for these roles that appear on Seek and LinkedIn and on the AICD job boards, and that's how you get a board seat. That is an absolute crazy, crazy myth. That does not ring true. The vast majority of these roles are unadvertised. It's called the hidden board market. It is behind the scenes. It's behind the closed doors. It's, appointments happen on the back of reputation, on the back of your profile, on the back of private individuals recommending you to others. That is how the vast majority of board roles get filled. So that is a big myth in the market that you've got to go down this advertised route. That is highly competitive and very lackluster in terms of results. And then finally, one of the myths that I hear a lot from the business community is that you've got to go and do all these unpaid roles to eventually end up in commercial paid board roles. And this is so wrong, and particularly for female candidates who get told this, that you've just got to go off and do all these not-for-profit board roles. And eventually you'll be asked into the majors. Eventually you'll be asked to come on down and get your first paid board role. It's an absolute myth. And in fact, it's really bad advice because we find now a lot of people come to us And they fall into two categories. They've either done a lot of little unpaid board roles, which are kind of insignificant, or they've gone down a harder core commercial pathway from the get-go, and they've got a much more appealing resume. And so when they all come to you in a few years' time and say, well, look, I'm ready for my first commercial board seat, the reality is you're up against some pretty stiff competition. So, there's definitely a lot of well-intentioned advice, but a lot of misconceptions about how the board market really works. Go back and have a look at a few of my videos on the rules of the game. They still hold true. Decades later, they are the roadmap that you need to understand how the board market works. So there's definitely a lot of myths, definitely a lot of misconceptions. Make sure you get the right advice from the right people. Come and have a chat with me. We'll set you straight on what's required to be a successful board member and to build a board portfolio on commercial terms.